Hi everyone, welcome to Humanities 2172 Online. This is the first of a bunch of videos where I will make and we'll talk about the books and we'll talk about the ideas in the class, and then we will do our best to continue some kind of normalcy in the class while we are separated by social distancing. I hope you are healthy and well wherever you are. Today, we're going to be talking about chapters 1 through 6 of Frankenstein. You will remember that we are reading Frankenstein as an example of Romanticism, and Romanticism is the movement that really begins in the 1790s after the Enlightenment. Not that one thing just ends and the other begins, but what happens, you will remember, in the Enlightenment is that first is there's a scientific revolution, the idea that we can determine from observation, from experiment, what the world's systems are like. That if we drop a stone 100 times and it falls every time, that's because there is a force called gravity that is at work on the stone. There are people experimenting with this in Europe. There are people experimenting with this all over the world. There are people experimenting with this in America. And what happens because of that is this scientific revolution leads to what we call the Age of Reason. And those two overlap as well. And the Age of Reason says that we can also determine from observation how we should best govern human systems, like political systems, and later on maybe even things like the mind, determine how the mind works, how human beings operate. We, for the Enlightenment, use the Declaration of Independence, in which the writers say, Thomas Jefferson is the writer, but remember he's on a committee with Adams and Franklin and Roger Sherman and others. And he says, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, among those life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And we talked a lot about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, but also about that idea that there are truths that are self-evident. The idea of deism being that there is a creator God, clockmaker God, sets the world in place, and then we live in the world that the creator made, and we can determine from observation. Remember, John Locke has that idea that says if something is good for us, it will be pleasurable. If it's bad for us, it will cause us pain. That's how we know the good. That's how we know the bad. The Declaration of Independence states that we can see from our observation of the world from natural law that all men are created equal and that they have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's the Enlightenment. That's the past. Now we're moving forward into Romanticism. If Enlightenment is a movement that values reason, and it is, then Romanticism values imagination and it values emotion. If Enlightenment values education, you remember John Locke's idea of the tabula rasa, the blank slate, that we're all born not predisposed to this or that, but that we are ultimately what we experience and what we learn. That's what makes a human being. Then Romanticism likes unsophisticated, uneducated, uncivilized, unspoiled humanity. The idea of the noble savage, for example, you will see if we were reading an American piece of Romanticism like Last of the Mohicans. In this book, what we see show up over and over is this idea that your ethnicity, the place that you're from, if you're Italian or Swiss or German, that very much determines what you are going to be like. So the Romantics have this idea that your birth, the conditions of your birth, say a lot about you before you ever become anything because of your education. We could think of the Enlightenment as a political movement. We could think of Romanticism as an artistic movement. That's another difference. And then lastly, I think for our reading here, we should think of Enlightenment as being very interested in natural law. That is what we can observe and determine and predict about the world from our observations of nature. The Enlightenment does a little bit different thing. The Enlightenment says that what nature is to the human being is it's something that we can learn from, but it's through a kind of personal, individual connection. And we see over and over in Frankenstein that the feelings of the characters are reflected in the environment in which they find themselves. So we begin in this North Pole sort of like icy climb. It's isolated, it is dangerous, it is sort of extreme, and that's where we meet Victor Frankenstein, just as an example, though there's going to be lots of examples as we go on. What I want you to know, or what I want you to be looking out for as we begin this book, is this idea of the romantic hero. That is also called the genius. And that genius is the person who has a special gift to give the world. They are set apart from everybody else. They have some gift that they're going to bestow on the world. And because of that, they do not operate on the same kind of moral rules as everybody else. And we talked about several examples of this in class. We talked about, I said Michael Jackson was one. We might think about somebody like Kanye, who kind of does his own thing. You might think about Donald Trump as one. He's like, doesn't abide by any of the rules that most of his followers would say are rules for being a good person and having a good life, but somehow we overlook those. We talked about Bill Clinton from the opposite political party, who in the 90s was obviously up to things that no one was proud of, but he got a kind of pass because he was like this kind of special figure. Those are real contemporary. What we see here is the book begins with the meeting of two romantic heroes, Robert Walton and Victor Frankenstein. And I just want to read a little bit of this conversation on page 11, where Victor Frankenstein is talking to Robert Walton. You'll remember Robert Walton is the guy who thinks he can sail to the North Pole. He has not discovered this through the observation of science. He just has this great feeling that once you sail to the North Pole, it suddenly becomes like beautiful up there. It's like sandy beaches and the dolphins are jumping out of the water or something. But this is what Victor says. No, this is what Walton says. He says, I was easily led by the sympathy which he evinced to use the language of my heart, to give utterance to the burning ardor of my soul. Lots of emotional language there. And to say with all the fervor that warmed me how gladly I would sacrifice my fortune, my existence, my every hope to the further utterance of my enterprise. One man's life or death were but a small price to pay for the acquirement of the knowledge which I sought, for the dominion I should acquire and transmit over the elemental foes of our race. What does that mean? That means that Walton sees, I've got this special gift. I've got this thing I'm going to do. I'm going to get to the North Pole. And if a few people have to die, if it hurts some people, if I break the rules of tradition and society and morality, who cares? Because I'm doing the great thing. And this is very much a picture of the romantic genius. What we see, the romantic hero, what we see here is that a darkness comes over Victor Frankenstein, and he says, "Oh, unhappy man, do you share my madness? Have you drunk also of the intoxicating draught? Hear me, let me reveal my tale, and you will dash the cup from your lips," he says on page 12. So you're at the beginning of your romantic hero arc. I'm at the end of it, and I'm going to tell you how tough it is. I'm going to tell you the price I've paid and that others have paid for my being a romantic hero, for my gift of genius to the world. The idea here is that this book, this fantastic book by 19-year-old Mary Shelley, who of course is married to a romantic hero, Percy Bysshe Shelley. We read his poem Ozymandias. The idea here is that this book is either a celebration of or a great critique of the idea of the romantic hero. The natives are restless in the other room. I'm just gonna try to close that door. And so we start off with this question of like, is this book celebrating the romantic hero, or is it critiquing the romantic hero?